The first knock came on a Wednesday evening, just when I had convinced myself no one in the building actually knew my name. I'd been there for 3 months, long enough to memorize the sound of the radiator sputtering at 2 a.m., long enough to realize I was the youngest tenant by at least a decade. Most days I liked it that way, less chance of someone noticing how often I reheated leftovers or how long I lingered over the same book. That night, I had just settled with a chipped mug of coffee, steam curling like something alive. The knock was soft, almost polite. When I opened the door, 3 women stood there. Not in some dramatic way, just as if they'd been walking the hall and happened to stop at me. They were neighbors I'd seen in passing, Mrs. Grant from across the hall, her sister who visited often, and then her, Elaine. Mid-40s, steady eyes, the kind of person who looked at you as though she already knew what you were going to say. "We thought we'd welcome you properly, Mrs. Grant said, lifting a plate of cookies wrapped in foil. Her sister smiled, almost too brightly, and added something about how the building needed more young energy. But it was Elaine who didn't say much. Just a small tilt of her head, as though she was measuring if I'd let them in or keep them at the doorway. I let them in. The apartment looked smaller with 3 extra bodies in it, my second-hand furniture suddenly obvious, the undone dishes like an accusation. I tried to tidy by nudging a pile of unopened mail toward the wall, but Elaine noticed. She noticed everything. Her eyes caught mine and lingered just a fraction too long before she looked down at the thermos on my counter. "You drink your coffee black?" she asked. "Most of the time," I said. "Less to buy." She smiled. Not wide, just enough to crease the corner of her mouth. "Efficient," she said, and I couldn't tell if it was approval or a joke. Her presence was quieter than the others. While Mrs. Grant chatted about the heating and her sister asked if I cooked for myself, Elaine stood near the bookshelf. She trailed her fingers lightly along the spines, not pulling any out, just tracing. When she stopped at the one I had left half open earlier, I felt a strange flicker of embarrassment, as though she'd caught me in some unmade thought. The women didn't stay long. They had their excuse, cookies delivered, neighborly duty complete. When they left, the apartment felt too still, as though the air hadn't settled back into its usual rhythm. I sat again with my coffee, now gone cold, and stared at the foil-covered plate. I wasn't thinking about Mrs. Grant or her sister. My thoughts kept circling back to Elaine's hand brushing over the book, the way she hadn't filled the silences with chatter. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over the unsent text I'd typed to a friend earlier. "Still don't know anyone here. It's like I don't exist in this place." I didn't hit send. Instead, another knock rattled the door. Quicker, lighter this time, almost impatient. When I opened it, only Elaine stood there. "Sorry," she said, eyes flicking to the floor, then back at me. "I left something." Her hands were empty. And for the first time since I'd moved into the building, I forgot about the radiator, the dishes, the unopened mail. She stood there, not moving, her voice caught halfway between an excuse and something else. "What did you leave?" I asked. Her eyes shifted past me into the apartment, though there was nothing of hers inside. Finally she said, "I think I forgot my scarf." She hadn't been wearing one. Still, I stepped aside. She entered with the ease of someone who didn't need permission, though her arms stayed close to her sides. The silence pressed in, broken only when she reached toward the thermos on the counter. "You always make coffee this late." "Sometimes. Helps me think." She smiled at that, faint but real. "I stopped drinking it after 6 years ago. Couldn't sleep otherwise. My husband—" She stopped herself, then shook her head. "Ex-husband. He used to joke I was addicted." The word hung between us, ex. I hadn't thought of her as someone with a past like that, though of course she had one. Mid-40s, probably a whole life I couldn't picture. I felt suddenly younger than I'd ever felt, like I was just borrowing space in an adult world. She noticed my hesitation. "You don't have to offer me any," she said. "Tea would be better anyway." I laughed awkwardly. "I don't really keep tea." "Of course you don't." She said it lightly, but not unkindly. I busied myself with the kettle anyway, even though I had nothing to steep. Just to have something to do with my hands. She didn't stop me, just leaned against the counter and studied the apartment again. "You're new at this," she said after a moment. "At what?" "Living alone. I can tell. You still keep things you don't really need, and you don't keep the things you do." I glanced at the unopened mail, the cluttered table, the empty shelves. She wasn't wrong. Maybe I'm just figuring it out. "Maybe," she said softly. Then, as if speaking more to herself, "I remember when I was 22. I thought I'd already wasted too much time. Funny how wrong I was." Her voice had a quiet weight, and I felt myself wanting to ask more, but I didn't. The kettle clicked off, startling the silence. I poured hot water into a cup and slid it toward her. No tea bag, just steam rising like a thin veil. She cradled it anyway. Didn't drink, just held it. "Thank you." We sat across from each other, not talking, the hum of the radiator filling the air. My thoughts kept slipping ahead, into impossible what-ifs. Her hand brushing mine, her voice low in the dark, the scandal if Mrs. Grant or her sister ever guessed. I pushed them back, ashamed of myself. Yet when she set the cup down and stood, she didn't leave right away. She placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, almost as if steadying herself. It lasted no more than a second. But it felt like a sentence left unfinished, daring me to imagine the rest. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next time it happened wasn't planned. I came back from the laundromat, juggling a half-broken basket, when I found her already waiting outside her door. Keys in hand, but not unlocking. Just standing there. "You're late," she said, though she had no reason to know my schedule. "Machines took forever," I muttered, shifting the basket against my hip. "Let me help." She reached for it without asking. I almost told her no, instinct, pride, but she'd already lifted one corner, and suddenly we were carrying it together through my doorway, clothes spilling like a breadcrumb trail. Inside, she set the basket down, fingers brushing against one of my shirts before she pulled back too quickly, as if burned. "You don't fold them right away?" she asked. "I usually don't bother." She shook her head, amused. "You'll regret that. Wrinkles never forgive you." She sat down, began folding. Neat, precise lines, her hands moving with an ease that made me feel younger again. Too young, like a boy watching someone's mother tidy up after him. But it didn't feel maternal. Not in the slightest. It felt dangerous. I joined in, fumbling through the motions. Our hands met once, lightly, over a plain black t-shirt. She froze, eyes flicking up to mine, then dropped the fabric between us. "Sorry," she whispered. There was nothing to apologize for, but neither of us reached again. The silence grew too heavy, so I filled it. "Do people talk much here? I mean, about neighbors?" Her lips pressed thin. "They talk enough." A pause, then softer. "That's why we have to be careful." Careful. The word stung. Not because she was wrong, but because she'd said we. It meant she'd thought about it too. A knock broke the air. I flinched. It was Mrs. Grant, peering in with her nosy smile. "Elaine, I thought I heard you. You two keeping each other company?" Elaine rose quickly, smoothing her blouse. "Just helping with laundry." Mrs. Grant's eyes darted from the basket to me, then back to Elaine. She lingered too long, before finally retreating. The door shut, and the silence came heavier than before. Elaine wouldn't look at me. She gathered the folded clothes into two perfect stacks, avoiding every glance. "I should go," she said finally. I nodded, though my chest ached with something unspoken. She reached for the last shirt, hesitated, and let it fall back into the basket. Then her hand hovered, not on the fabric but closer, just near enough to mine that I could feel the warmth without the touch. For a second, it felt like gravity tilted, pulling us forward. But then she stepped back, hand falling to her side. "Good night," she said, barely audible. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was left staring at that shirt on top of the pile, as though it had been waiting for me to finish what she hadn't done. It was raining that evening, not a storm, just the kind of steady drizzle that soaked you without drama. I ran into her near the stairwell. She was holding a small grocery bag, hair damp, shoulders pulled in. "You'll catch cold," I said awkwardly, before I could stop myself. She gave me a look, half amused. "That's something my mother used to say." I offered to walk her the rest of the way. She hesitated, then nodded. The bag swung lightly between us as we stepped outside. The streets smelled of wet asphalt and something metallic. Neither of us carried umbrellas. For a while, we walked in silence. Our sleeves brushed once, twice. Each time, she shifted just slightly away, then back again. "Do people ever notice?" I asked suddenly. The question slipped out before I could filter it. Her jaw tightened. "Notice what?" "Us. Talking. Being seen together." She didn't answer right away. Then, lo, they notice everything. It's what people do when their own lives aren't enough. The bitterness surprised me. She glanced at me then, eyes searching my face, and I realized she was testing, waiting for me to pull back, or lean closer. I tried to steady my voice. "I don't care if they talk. That's because you're 22. Her reply was quick, almost sharp. Then softer. "You still believe everything is worth the risk?" We reached a bench near the corner store, wet from the rain. She sat anyway, setting the grocery bag down beside her. I joined, careful not to sit too close. After a pause, she spoke again. "When I was your age, I married. Too quickly. Thought love was enough to hold a life together. I was wrong." Her voice caught, but only for a second. "I won't repeat that mistake." I wanted to tell her this was different, that I wasn't asking for promises, only presence. But the words stuck. Instead, I watched the way her hand worried the edge of the paper bag, smoothing and creasing. Finally, I said, "It doesn't feel like a mistake." She looked at me, rain dripping from her lashes, and for a moment the distance between us disappeared. She leaned in, barely, and I could feel the question hanging there, hers, mine, both. But then she drew back, closing the space she'd almost crossed. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered. Maybe she was right. Still, my chest ached with the truth I couldn't swallow. "I think I do," I said. The air thickened. She pressed her lips together, searching my face as if weighing something. Then she asked, quiet, almost breaking, "What is it you really want from me?" The rain fell harder, the world narrowing to that question, hanging, unanswered, between us. The next morning, she wasn't there. Usually I'd catch her on the stairwell, or hear her door close when I left for class. That day, nothing. Just the sound of the elevator groaning its way down, and a neighbor's dog scratching at the hall carpet. I told myself not to notice. Not to expect her. But when I came back that evening, grocery bag in hand, her door was shut tight, lights off. For 2 days, the silence stretched. No knocks. No accidental run-ins. Even Mrs. Grant's gossiping footsteps felt louder in her absence. On the third night, I saw her in the lobby. She was with a boy. Not a child, closer to my age, maybe 18. He carried a duffel bag, slung carelessly over one shoulder, and the resemblance was obvious. Same dark eyes, same tilt of the chin. Her son. She noticed me before I could slip away. "This is Daniel," she said, voice steady but her gaze darting. "He's staying with me for a while." The boy barely nodded, already scrolling his phone. She touched his arm gently, guiding him toward the elevator. She didn't linger. Didn't offer an explanation. Just a look, brief, unreadable, before the doors closed between us. After that, she avoided me. Not obviously. Just enough. Doors timed differently. Walks taken when I wasn't around. Once I thought I heard her laugh through the wall, softer than before, as though she was practicing it for someone else. The space between us grew heavier than our closeness ever had. I tried to keep busy. Late-night study sessions, aimless walks, laundry folded right away this time. but every habit seemed to curve back toward her absence. I kept catching myself listening for her knock, pausing by her door, thumb hovering over my phone with no one to text. Finally, I drafted something. You don't have to explain. I miss you being around. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Never hit send. The next morning, I caught sight of her again in the stairwell. She was dressed for work, coat neat, hair tied back. She smiled, polite, nothing more. A smile meant for a stranger. "Morning," she said. I managed the same word back. My throat felt tight, but not from heartbreak exactly. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. That evening, I set my coffee down at the small kitchen table. One chair across from me sat empty. I almost reached for the second mug anyway, almost poured her cup, almost knocked on her door. Almost. Instead, I left the chair as it was. And for the first time, the silence felt permanent. It happened late on a Sunday night. The building was quiet, most lights already out. I had just finished rinsing a mug when I heard the knock, barely 3 taps, softer than before. When I opened the door, she stood there. No grocery bag, no excuse. Just her. "Daniel went back to campus," she said. Her voice sounded steadier than her hands, which fidgeted with the strap of her bag. I stepped aside. She entered without waiting, walking straight to the table where the empty chair sat. For a moment, she looked at it like she recognized the habit I'd built around her absence. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "Then why are you?" Her eyes lifted to mine. Not sharp, not evasive, just tired. "Because avoiding you was harder than I thought it would be." The words hung there, fragile. I didn't know what to do with them. So I busied myself with the kettle, the only ritual that made sense. She watched, silent, as the water warmed. Finally I said, "I thought I'd done something wrong." "You didn't." A pause. Then softer. "I did." I turned, waiting. She hesitated, then sat, smoothing her hands flat against the table. "I wanted something I shouldn't. And when Daniel showed up, I remembered I was supposed to be someone's mother. Not someone else's mistake." The kettle clicked. I poured without asking if she wanted any. She accepted the cup anyway, both hands wrapped around it like she needed the heat more than the drink. "I don't think you're a mistake," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "You make me feel." I stopped. Words caught too heavy. "Like I exist. That's all." Her lips pressed into a line. She didn't look away. "Do you know what you're asking for?" I shook my head. "No. And maybe that's the point. I'm not asking. I'm just telling you." The silence stretched. Rain tapped faintly against the window, the radiator hissed. She reached across the table, not far, just enough that her fingers brushed mine. "Do you know what I'm risking?" she asked. "I think so." We stayed like that, hands barely touching, both of us holding more weight in that contact than any kiss could have carried. Her shoulders eased. Not relief exactly, but something like release. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. Finally, she whispered, "Okay." Just that. Nothing more. But in that moment, it was enough. Time passed, not dramatically, but the way it always does. Weeks folded into months. The rhythm of the building shifted, and somehow we found ourselves inside it together. It wasn't some grand transformation. There were still unopened letters on my table, dishes stacked too long in the sink. Her life was still hers, work schedules, calls from her son, quiet evenings when she wanted space. But between all that, there was a pattern forming, ordinary and steady. Some mornings, I'd hear her knock right at 8:47 a.m., like she timed it against my late starts. She'd stand in the doorway, hair half done, holding out a thermos. "Tea," she'd say, because she knew I still hadn't bothered to buy any. I'd pass her my mug in return, black coffee, no sugar. She never drank it, just pretended to sip, smiling at the bitterness. Other times it was me, showing up at her door with laundry half folded, knowing she'd shake her head but help anyway. Our hands brushed less by accident now, but we still never talked about what it meant. We didn't need to. There were walks, too. The same corner bench where the rain once held us apart. We'd sit there in the evenings, sometimes in silence, sometimes with her telling me half-stories from years ago, things she hadn't said to anyone in a long time. I didn't always know what to answer, but she never seemed to need answers. Just someone listening. Once, I asked why she kept coming back, why she hadn't pulled away for good. She looked at me for a long time before replying. "Because it feels calm," she said. "And I don't get much of that." It wasn't love declared, not in the way people write it down. But it was enough. The nights weren't all easy. There were doubts, long stretches where either of us spoke first, evenings she slipped away early because the weight of it pressed too close. But every time, she returned. And every time, I found myself waiting, not with desperation, but with a kind of quiet certainty. Life didn't change all at once. But it was warmer. Better. Like a room you'd grown used to sitting in, suddenly letting the light through the curtains. The last time we walked home together, rain starting to fall again, I noticed how she didn't shift away when our sleeves brushed. She kept pace with me, steady, until we reached the stairwell. "You'll catch cold," I said, half smiling at the echo of her mother's warning. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's your line now." And maybe that was our language, the little things, the carried-over lines, the ordinary routines that only made sense to us. I didn't need to ask if it was enough. I could see it in the way she paused at her door, eyes lingering just a little too long, before whispering goodnight. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?